Imagine a world veiled in a soft, pre-dawn light. The air is crisp, carrying the earthy scent of the forest floor and the faint tang of approaching rain. This is the world of our Paleolithic ancestors, a time when survival was a daily dance with nature, and food was the life-giving currency of existence. In the Paleolithic era, which stretched from around 2.6 million years ago to about 10,000 BCE, our early human predecessors were hunter-gatherers. Their diet was a rich tapestry woven from the diverse offerings of the natural world. Unlike the settled agricultural societies that would come later, these ancient humans were in a constant state of movement, following the rhythms of the seasons and the availability of food sources. The gathering aspect of their diet was a meticulous and knowledge-based activity. Women and children were often at the forefront of this endeavor. They had an intimate understanding of the local flora, having spent generations observing and learning about the plants in their environment. Spring was a time of plenty as tender shoots, wild greens, and early, blooming berries emerged from their winter slumber. Dandelion greens, rich in vitamins and minerals, were a common find. These were gathered and either eaten raw or added to simple stews. Berries, such as strawberries, blackberries, and raspberries, were another important part of their diet. The bright, colored fruits were not only a sweet treat but also a valuable source of vitamin C and K. Nuts, like acorns, chestnuts, and walnuts, were also harvested. However, processing nuts was no easy feat. Acorns, for example, contain tannins, which are bitter and potentially toxic. Our ancestors had discovered that by leaching the acorns in water, usually by soaking them in a stream or a natural water basin, they could remove the tannins and make the nuts edible. This process required patience and time, but the resulting nut meats were a high-energy food source, rich in protein and healthy fats. Roots and tubers were also a staple in the hunter-gatherer diet. Plants like wild carrots, yams, and Jerusalem artichokes were dug up using simple tools, often pointed sticks. These underground treasures were a reliable source of carbohydrates, providing the energy needed for the daily activities of the group. Some roots could be eaten raw, but more often, they were roasted over a fire. Roasting not only made the roots more palatable but also made their nutrients more easily digestible. Hunting, on the other hand, was a perilous and communal activity, usually carried out by the men of the group. It required strength, skill, and a deep understanding of the behavior of the animals they pursued. In the woodlands, deer were a common target. Hunters would study the deer's tracks, their feeding patterns, and their bedding areas. They would use a variety of weapons, such as spears, bows and arrows, and traps. The development of these weapons was a significant milestone in the Paleolithic era, as it allowed for more efficient hunting. Wild boar was another sought after prey. These animals were strong and often aggressive, making the hunt a dangerous but rewarding one. The meat of the wild boar was a rich source of protein, fat, and essential nutrients. Hunting large animals like deer and wild boar was not a solo activity. It required the cooperation of several hunters. They would often work together to surround the animal, using strategic positioning to drive it towards a pre-arranged trap or into a position where it could be more easily attacked. Smaller game, such as rabbits, squirrels, and birds, were also part of the hunter-gatherer diet. Rabbits were quick and elusive, but their small size made them easier to catch compared to larger animals. Hunters would use snares, which were simple traps made from vines or animal sinew. These snares were set along rabbit trails, and when a rabbit ran through, it would get caught by the neck or a leg. Squirrels were hunted using bows and arrows or by climbing trees to reach their nests. Birds were often caught using nets or by setting traps baited with grains or insects. When a hunt was successful, it was a cause for celebration within the group. The meat was carefully divided among the members, with each person receiving a share according to their needs. The process of butchering the animal was also a communal effort. The hunters would use sharp stone tools to skin the animal, remove the organs, and cut meat into manageable pieces. The organs, such as the liver, heart, and kidneys, were considered a delicacy and were often eaten first. They were rich in nutrients like iron, vitamin A, and B vitamins. The meat was then prepared in various ways. The most common method was roasting over an open fire. A spit, usually a long, pointed stick, was used to skewer the meat. The meat was rotated slowly over the fire to ensure even cooking. Roasting not only cooked the meat but also imparted a delicious smoky flavor. Sometimes, the meat was also boiled in a simple stone-lined pit filled with water. Herbs and wild onions were added to the water to flavor the meat and make a simple broth. The sharing of food was not just a matter of survival but also a way to strengthen the social bonds within the group. After a successful hunt or a bountiful gathering, the entire community would come together. They would sit around the fire, sharing stories of the day's activities, and enjoying the meal. This sense of community and cooperation was essential for their survival in the harsh Paleolithic environment. In addition to plants and animals, our Paleolithic ancestors also consumed insects and grubs. Insects like grasshoppers, crickets, and caterpillars were a common source of protein. They were easy to catch, especially in grassy areas, and could be eaten raw or roasted. Grubs, which are the larvae of beetles and other insects, were often found in decaying logs or under the bark of trees. They were high in fat and protein, providing a concentrated source of energy. As the seasons changed, so did the availability of food. In the summer, the abundance of fruits and berries made for a more varied diet. The long days provided more time for gathering and hunting. In the fall, the focus shifted to storing food for the winter months. Nuts and dried fruits were collected and stored in natural shelters, such as caves or hollow trees. The hunters would also try to hunt larger animals, like bears, before they went into hibernation. The bear meat was then preserved by smoking or drying, which allowed it to be stored for longer periods. In the winter, food became scarce. The group would rely more on the stored food and whatever wild plants could be found. Some plants, like evergreen needles, were used to make tea, which provided a source of vitamin C and helped prevent scurvy. Hunting during the winter was more difficult, as many animals had either migrated or gone into hibernation. However, the hunters would still search for signs of game, such as tracks in the snow, and set traps in strategic locations. The hunter-gatherer diet in the Paleolithic era was a delicate balance between what nature provided and the skills and knowledge of the people. It was a diet that was rich in nutrients, diverse in its offerings, and deeply connected to the environment. The way our ancestors obtained, prepared, and shared food was not only a matter of survival but also a reflection of their social structure and cultural values. Their intimate knowledge of the natural world and their ability to adapt to its changing seasons were the keys to their survival in this ancient and challenging time. Imagine a landscape bathed in the warm glow of the morning sun. The gentle breeze carries the faint scent of freshly turned earth. We are now in a period of profound transformation in human history, the Neolithic Revolution. This was a time when our ancestors began to shift from a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a more settled way of life centered around farming. The Neolithic Revolution, which occurred around 10,000 BCE, marked a significant turning point in human civilization. It was a slow but revolutionary change that would have far-reaching consequences for every aspect of human life. The shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture was not a sudden decision but rather a gradual process shaped by various factors. One of the main drivers was likely the changing climate. As the Ice Age ended, the climate became more stable and conducive to the growth of certain plants. This allowed our ancestors to experiment with cultivating wild grains and other edible plants. The domestication of plants was a crucial step in the birth of farming. Our Neolithic ancestors started to selectively plant seeds from the most productive plants. They learned to recognize the best tasting, most disease-resistant, and highest-yielding varieties. For example, in the Fertile Crescent, which spans modern-day Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine, early farmers began to cultivate wild wheat and barley. These grains were a staple in their diet even during the hunter-gatherer days. But instead of just gathering them from the wild, they started to plant them in carefully prepared fields. To prepare the fields, they used simple tools. Stone hoes were used to break up the soil, making it easier for the seeds to take root. They would clear the land of weeds and debris, creating an environment where the crops could thrive. As the plants grew, the farmers learned to care for them. They observed the effects of watering, and over time, they developed basic irrigation systems. In some areas, they dug small channels to divert water from nearby rivers or streams to their fields. This was a significant advancement as it allowed them to grow crops even during dry periods. The domestication of animals also went hand in hand with the development of agriculture. Dogs were among the first animals to be domesticated. They had been wild wolves initially, but over time, they developed a symbiotic relationship with humans. Dogs were useful for hunting, as they could help track and catch prey. They also provided protection for the human settlements, barking at the approach of dangerous animals or strangers. As time passed, other animals were domesticated. Sheep and goats were ideal for herding. They provided meat, milk, and wool. The Neolithic people learned to manage the herds, moving them to different pastures according to the seasons. Cows were also domesticated, mainly for their milk and as draft animals. The domestication of cows was a major development as they could be used to pull plows, which made farming more efficient. The plow, usually made of wood, was a revolutionary tool. It could break up the soil more deeply than the stone hoes, allowing for better cultivation and higher crop yields. The shift to farming brought about a sense of stability. For the first time, humans could build permanent shelters. Instead of constantly moving in search of food, they could stay in one place and build communities. These early farming communities were small, usually consisting of a few families. The houses were simple, often made of mud, brick or wattle, and daub. They had thatched roofs for protection from the elements. living in settled communities also led to the development of a more complex social structure. In hunter-gatherer societies, the division of labor was mainly based on gender, with men hunting and women gathering. In farming communities, however, the division of labor became more diverse. Some people focused on farming, while others became artisans. Artisans were skilled in making tools, pottery, and textiles. Pottery, in particular, was an important development. It allowed for the storage of grains, water, and food. Early pottery was made by hand, and the potters would shape the clay into various forms, such as jars, bowls, and pots. They would then decorate the pottery with simple patterns, which not only made it more aesthetically pleasing but also served as a form of cultural expression. The surplus of food produced from farming was another significant outcome. With the ability to grow more food than they could consume immediately, the Neolithic people had a buffer against food shortages. This surplus also enabled trade. Communities could exchange their surplus food for other goods, such as tools made of different materials or luxury items. Trade networks began to form, connecting different farming communities. These trade networks were not only economic but also cultural. They allowed for the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. However, the Neolithic Revolution also had its challenges. One of the main problems was the risk of crop failure. A bad harvest due to drought, floods, or pests could mean a shortage of food for the community. To mitigate this risk, the farmers had to develop ways to store food for longer periods. They used underground storage pits to keep grains dry and protected from rodents. They also learned to preserve food through methods like drying, salting, and smoking. The close proximity of humans and animals in farming communities also led to the spread of diseases. Domestic animals carried diseases that could be transmitted to humans. This was a new challenge that the Neolithic people had to face. But despite these challenges, the Neolithic Revolution laid the foundation for the development of more complex civilizations. It was the starting point for the growth of cities, the development of writing systems, and the advancement of technology. In conclusion, the Neolithic Revolution and the birth of farming were pivotal moments in human history. It was a time of great change, as our ancestors learned to work with nature in a new way. The domestication of plants and animals, the development of permanent settlements, and the growth of social complexity were all part of this remarkable transformation. This revolution set the stage for the future of human civilization, shaping the way we live, eat, and interact with each other to this day. Imagine a land where the sun beats down relentlessly, and the vast expanse of the desert seems endless. But amidst this arid landscape, there is a ribbon of life, the Nile River. In ancient Egypt, the Nile was not just a river, it was the very source of sustenance, and food was intricately woven into the fabric of their civilization, thanks to this great waterway. The annual flooding of the Nile was a natural phenomenon that the ancient Egyptians both feared and revered. Every year, around midsummer, the river would begin to rise, fed by the heavy rains in the Ethiopian highlands. As the waters surged, they would inundate the narrow strip of land along the riverbanks. But when the floodwaters receded, they left behind a thick layer of fertile silt. This silt was like gold to the Egyptians, as it provided the perfect soil for agriculture. The Egyptians took full advantage of this natural gift. Wheat and barley were the two most important crops they cultivated. Wheat, in particular, was the cornerstone of their diet. It was used to make bread, which was a staple food for people of all social classes. The process of making bread was a well-established tradition. First, the wheat grains were ground into flour. This was often done using a hand-held stone quern. Two stones, one flat and the other convex, were used to crush the grains between them. The resulting flour was then mixed with water, yeast, which was likely a natural by-product of fermentation that the Egyptians had learned to harness, and sometimes a bit of honey or other sweeteners to enhance the flavor. The dough was left to rise in a warm place. The Egyptians had an intuitive understanding of the fermentation process, knowing that the yeast would cause the dough to expand. Once risen, the dough was shaped into loaves and baked in clay ovens. These ovens were heated by burning wood or dung, and the bread was carefully monitored to ensure it was cooked to perfection. The smell of freshly baked bread would waft through the streets of Egyptian towns and villages, a comforting and familiar scent. Barley was also a significant crop. It was used to make beer, which was another staple in the Egyptian diet. Beer making in ancient Egypt was a complex process. The barley was first germinated, a process called malting. This was done by soaking the barley in water and then allowing it to sprout. The sprouted barley was then dried and ground into a coarse powder. This powder was mixed with water and left to ferment. The fermentation process was likely initiated by wild yeast in the air or from previous batches of beer. The resulting beer was not as strong as the beer we know today, but it was a popular and important beverage. It was consumed by people of all ages, as it was considered a safe alternative to water, which could sometimes be contaminated. In addition to grains, the Egyptians grew a variety of vegetables. Onions, garlic, leeks, and lettuce were commonly cultivated. These vegetables were not only used to add flavor to their meals but also had medicinal properties. Onions and garlic, for example, were believed to have antibacterial and anti-inflammatory effects. They were often used in cooking, either added to stews or eaten raw with bread. Fruits were also an important part of the Egyptian diet. Dates were a staple fruit, especially in the drier regions. Date palms were widespread in Egypt, and the sweet, nutritious dates were a valuable source of energy. They could be eaten fresh or dried and stored for later use. Grapes were another popular fruit, mainly used for making wine. Wine making in ancient Egypt was a highly respected craft. The grapes were crushed, and the juice was fermented in large clay jars. The quality of the wine varied depending on the type of grapes used and the fermentation process. Wine was not only a beverage but also had religious significance. It was used in religious ceremonies and offerings to the gods. The Nile River itself was a bountiful source of food. It was teeming with fish, and fishing was an important occupation in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians used a variety of methods to catch fish. Nets were a common tool, used to catch large schools of fish. They also used hooks and lines, often baited with small pieces of bread or insects. Some fishermen used traps made of woven reeds or baskets. These traps were placed in strategic locations in the river, and the fish would swim into them and get trapped. Fish was an important source of protein in the Egyptian diet. Different types of fish were caught, including catfish, tilapia, and mullet. Some fish were considered more valuable than others. For example, the Nile perch was highly prized for its large size and delicious taste. The Egyptians prepared fish in various ways. It could be grilled over an open fire, baked in oven, or cooked in a stew with vegetables. The Egyptians also raised livestock. Cattle, sheep, and goats were common. Cattle were used for milk, meat, and as draft animals. They were highly valued, and owning a large herd of cattle was a sign of wealth. Sheep and goats provided meat, milk, and wool. The wool was used to make textiles, which were an important part of the Egyptian economy. Poultry, such as chickens and ducks, were also raised for their meat and eggs. Food in ancient Egypt was not just about sustenance, it was also deeply connected to their religious beliefs. The gods were believed to provide the bounty of the land, and food was often used in religious offerings. For example, bread and beer were commonly offered to the gods in temples. The Egyptians believed that by offering these gifts, they could gain the favor of the gods and ensure a good harvest and prosperity. In conclusion, the food in ancient Egypt was a reflection of their unique relationship with the Nile River. The river provided the fertile soil, water, and a source of food, allowing the Egyptians to build a prosperous and complex civilization. Their agricultural practices, food preparation techniques, and the role of food in their religion all contributed to the rich tapestry of ancient Egyptian culture. Imagine strolling through the vibrant and bustling markets of ancient Thebes, where the air is a rich tapestry of scents. The warm, yeasty aroma of freshly baked bread mingles with the sharp, pungent smell of exotic spices, and the sweet, enticing fragrance of ripe fruits wafts through the narrow alleyways. In ancient Egypt, food was far more than a simple means of sustenance, it was an intricate expression of their deep-seated culture, a visible symbol of social hierarchy, and a profound connection to the divine. While the staples of the Egyptian diet, such as wheat, barley, vegetables, fruits, and fish, formed the foundation of their cuisine, the culinary landscape was a diverse and sophisticated realm. The Egyptians, with their ingenuity and long-standing traditions, were masters at transforming these basic ingredients into an extensive array of mouth-watering dishes. They employed a wide range of cooking techniques, from slow simmering to open fire roasting, and their palette of seasonings was constantly evolving. One of the most beloved and widespread dishes in ancient Egypt was the stew, known as ta'am. These stews were a harmonious blend of various ingredients. Meat, whether it was the tender beef reserved for the wealthy, the more commonly available lamb or goat, or the humble fish from the Nile, was often combined with an assortment of vegetables. Root vegetables like carrots and parsnips, leafy greens such as spinach and kale, and legumes like lentils were popular choices. The stew pot was filled with water, and a medley of spices was added to create a symphony of flavors. Cumin, with its earthy and slightly bitter notes, coriander, bringing a citrusy and warm aroma, and fenugreek, adding a sweet and nutty undertone, were just some of the spices that danced in the pot. The stew would then be left to simmer gently over a slow, burning fire for hours on end. This slow cooking process was crucial, as it allowed the flavors to meld together seamlessly, creating a rich and comforting dish. The longer the stew simmered, the more intense and complex the flavors became. Ta'am was a highly adaptable dish. It could be tailored to the changing seasons, with ingredients adjusted according to what was readily available. In the spring, when fresh greens were abundant, they would be added in generous amounts. During the harvest season, an influx of grains and legumes would find their way into the stew. Moreover, the stew could also be customized based on the economic status of the household. The affluent would enjoy time with prime cuts of meat, perhaps adding a touch of expensive spices to elevate the dish further. In contrast, the common people would make do with more humble ingredients, relying on the natural flavors of vegetables and small, locally caught fish. Dairy products also held a significant place in the ancient Egyptian diet. Cows, goats, and sheep were the primary sources of milk, which was transformed into a variety of dairy delights. Cheese, in particular, was a staple. There were numerous types of cheese, each with its own unique texture and flavor. Soft, creamy cheeses were a treat, often eaten on their own or spread on bread. These soft cheeses were made by curdling milk with natural substances like vinegar or certain plant extracts. The curds were then drained and left to set, resulting in a smooth and velvety texture. On the other hand, hard, aged cheeses were more durable and could be stored for longer periods. These were made by pressing the curds more firmly and allowing them to age, sometimes for months. The aging process imparted a more intense and complex flavor to the cheese. Some cheeses were further flavored with herbs such as thyme, rosemary, or mint, or with spices like pepper or cinnamon, adding an extra layer of taste to this already beloved food. Butter, another dairy product, was not only used in cooking but also as a spread. Its rich, creamy texture added a luxurious touch to bread. Butter was made by churning milk or cream, a process that separated the fat from the liquid. The Egyptians had different methods of churning, from using simple containers and manually agitating the milk to more elaborate devices that made the process more efficient. The resulting butter was used to sauté vegetables, add richness to stews, or simply spread on warm, freshly baked bread, enhancing the flavor with its buttery goodness. Honey, the golden nectar of the gods, was the primary sweetener in ancient Egypt. Beekeeping was an ancient and well-respected practice in the land of the pharaohs. The Egyptians had a deep reverence for honey, not only for its delicious taste but also for its numerous uses. In baking, honey was used to sweeten bread, cakes, and pastries. It added a moist and sweet texture to the baked goods, making them even more delectable. Honey was also used to sweeten beverages, such as the popular Egyptian beer or herbal teas. A drizzle of honey could transform a simple drink into a luxurious and refreshing treat. Medicinally, honey was believed to have healing properties. It was used to treat wounds, as its antibacterial properties helped prevent infections. It was also used in various medicinal remedies, either on its own or in combination with other herbs and substances. In religious ceremonies, honey was considered a symbol of purity and sweetness. It was offered to the gods as a token of devotion and gratitude. Desserts made with honey were a luxurious indulgence, often reserved for special occasions. One such decadent dessert was a honey-soaked cake. Made from fine wheat flour, the cake was baked to a golden brown. It was then soaked in a rich honey syrup, which seeped into every pore of the cake, making it moist and incredibly sweet. Nuts, such as almonds or walnuts, and dried fruits like dates or raisins were added to the cake, providing a delightful contrast in texture and adding extra flavor. The Egyptians had a penchant for pickled foods, which were both a way to preserve ingredients and add a tangy, zesty element to their diet. Vegetables like cucumbers, turnips, radishes, and even onions were commonly pickled. The pickling process involved immersing the vegetables in a brine solution, which was a mixture of water, salt, and sometimes vinegar. Spices such as dill, mustard seeds, and cloves were added to the brine, infusing the pickled vegetables with a complex and flavorful profile. The pickled vegetables were left to ferment for a period of time, during which the flavors developed and the vegetables took on a tangy, slightly sour taste. These pickled vegetables were served as side dishes, often accompanying the main meal. They provided a refreshing contrast to the richer, more substantial stews and meats, cutting through the fattiness and adding a burst of flavor. Meat was an important part of the diet for those who could afford it, and it was closely associated with social status. Beef was highly prized and considered a luxury food. Cattle were not only a valuable source of meat but also held religious significance. The Egyptians believed that certain cows were sacred, and their slaughter was restricted. However, for the non-sacred cattle, they were carefully raised and fattened. The meat was cooked in various ways, with roasting on a spit over an open fire being a popular method. The open fire roasting imparted a delicious smoky flavor to the beef, and the slow rotation of the spit ensured even cooking. The wealthy would often have elaborate roasting pits and skilled cooks to prepare the beef to perfection. The meat was then sliced and served, perhaps with a side of roasted vegetables or a dollop of rich, creamy sauce. Lamb and goat were more commonly consumed by the general population. These meats were often cooked in stews, where their flavors could meld with the other ingredients. The Egyptians had a unique way of preparing lamb. They would stuff the lamb with a mixture of grains, such as barley or wheat, herbs like parsley, sage, and oregano, and spices like cumin, coriander, and cinnamon. The stuffing not only added a depth of flavor to the meat but also helped keep it moist during the cooking process. The stuffed lamb was then roasted or cooked in a slow, simmering stew, resulting in tender, flavorful meat that was a favorite at family gatherings and celebrations. Poultry, especially ducks and geese, was another popular source of meat. These birds were often force-fed to increase their size and fat content, making the meat more succulent. Ducks and geese were cooked in a variety of ways. They could be roasted, their skin turning crispy and golden brown while the meat inside remained tender and juicy. Poultry was also cooked in stews, where the rich, fatty meat added a depth of flavor to the broth. The eggs of ducks and geese were also an important part of the diet. They were eaten boiled, used in baking, or made into omelets. The eggs were often seasoned with salt, pepper, and a touch of herbs, creating a simple yet delicious dish. In addition to the food itself, the Egyptians had distinct dining customs that reflected their social and cultural values. Meals were typically eaten sitting on the floor, with a low table placed in front of the diners. The wealthy, however, had more elaborate dining arrangements. They had ornate tables made of precious woods, such as ebony or cedar, inlaid with ivory, precious stones, or mother or of pearl. These tables were not only functional but also works of art, a symbol of the owner's wealth and status. The food was served on pottery or metal plates. Pottery plates were commonly used by the general population. These plates were often hand-painted with intricate designs, depicting scenes from daily life, religious ceremonies, or nature. Metal plates, on the other hand, were more luxurious and were used by the nobility. They were made of bronze, silver, or even gold, and were often engraved with elaborate patterns. The utensils used were mainly spoons and knives. Spoons were used to scoop up stews, soups, and other liquid-based dishes, while knives were used to cut meat and other solid foods. Forks were not commonly used in ancient Egypt. Instead, people would use their fingers to pick up food, a practice that was considered normal and acceptable. Eating was a social occasion in ancient Egypt. Families would gather around the table to share a meal, a time for bonding and communication. Guests were always welcomed with hospitality, and hosting a meal for guests was a way to show respect and generosity. During feasts, which were often held to celebrate special occasions such as festivals, weddings, or religious ceremonies, a wide variety of dishes would be served. The table would be laden with an array of stews, meats, vegetables, fruits, and desserts. Music and entertainment, such as musicians playing flutes, harps, or drums, and dancers performing traditional routines, would accompany the meal, creating a festive and joyous atmosphere. These feasts were not only a time to enjoy good food but also a way to strengthen social bonds, celebrate achievements, and express gratitude. Food was also an integral part of religious ceremonies in ancient Egypt. As mentioned earlier, bread, beer, and honey were commonly offered to the gods. These offerings were believed to please the gods and ensure their continued favor and protection. In addition, certain foods were associated with specific gods or festivals. For example, fish was sometimes offered to the god Hapi, the personification of the Nile flood. Hapi was believed to be responsible for the annual flooding of the Nile, which brought fertile silt to the land, enabling agriculture to thrive. Offering fish to Hapi was a way to thank him for his blessings and to ensure a bountiful harvest. During religious festivals, special foods were prepared and consumed. These foods were often symbolic and had a deeper meaning. For instance, during the festival of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, a type of bread called djed bread was made. The djed bread was shaped like the djed pillar, which was a symbol of Osiris and represented stability and order. Eating the djed bread during the festival was a way for the Egyptians to connect with Osiris and seek his protection in the afterlife. In conclusion, ancient Egyptian cuisine was a rich and complex tapestry of flavors, ingredients, and cultural practices. It was deeply influenced by the availability of resources, the social hierarchy, and the religious beliefs of the time. From the simple yet satisfying stews of the common people to the elaborate and luxurious feasts of the nobility, food in ancient Egypt played a central role in the lives of its people. It was a medium through which they expressed their culture, social status, and spiritual beliefs. The culinary traditions of ancient Egypt continue to fascinate us today, offering a glimpse into the vibrant and sophisticated world of this ancient civilization. Imagine stepping into a dimly lit, circular room filled with the warm glow of oil lamps. The air is thick with the scent of burning olive oil, the rich aroma of wine, and the savory smell of freshly prepared food. This is the setting of a symposium in ancient Greece, a gathering that was much more than just a meal. It was a confluence of food, drink, philosophy, and social interaction. The symposium was an exclusive event, typically attended by men of the upper class. It was a time for them to relax, engage in intellectual discussions, and strengthen social bonds. The venue was often a special room in a wealthy household, called the andron. The andron was designed to accommodate the guests comfortably, with couches arranged in a circular or semi-circular pattern around a central space. The symposium usually began in the evening. As the guests arrived, they were greeted with a ritual purification, often involving washing their hands and feet. This was a symbolic act, representing the cleansing of the body and mind before entering the sacred space of the symposium. After the purification, the guests would recline on the couches, each accompanied by a small table filled with an array of appetizers. The appetizers, known as aproboli, were a delicious prelude to the main event. They included a variety of foods such as olives, cheese, nuts, and small pastries. Olives, with their briny flavor, were a staple. They were often served with a side of olive oil for dipping, enhancing their taste. Cheese, made from sheep or goat milk, came in different textures and flavors. Some were soft and creamy, while others were hard and aged. Nuts, like almonds and walnuts, provided a crunchy contrast, and the small pastries, filled with savory or sweet fillings, added a touch of indulgence. Once the guests were settled, the wine pouring ceremony began. Wine was the lifeblood of the symposium. It was not just a beverage but a symbol of celebration, joy, and social harmony. The wine was usually a blend of different grape varieties, carefully selected for its flavor and quality. Before being served, the wine was often diluted with water. The Greeks believed that undiluted wine was too strong and could lead to excessive drunkenness, which was considered unseemly in the context of the symposium. The wine was poured by a young boy, known as the kottabos. The kottabos was responsible for ensuring that each guest received an equal amount of wine. As he poured, the guests would engage in light conversation, sharing jokes and stories. The wine pouring was not a simple act but a ritual in itself. The kottabos would pour the wine in a graceful manner, and the guests would often offer words of appreciation or make toasts. After the initial wine pouring, the main part of the symposium, the symposium, began. This was the time for serious discussions. The topics of conversation could range from politics and current events to philosophy and art. The Greeks were passionate about intellectual debates, and the symposium provided the perfect platform for such exchanges. For example, discussions about the nature of justice, the role of the state, or the meaning of beauty were common. As the discussions progressed, more food was served. The main dishes were often a combination of meat, fish, and vegetables. Roasted meats, such as lamb or goat, were a favorite. The meat was slow, roasted over an open fire, seasoned with a blend of herbs like thyme, rosemary, and oregano. The slow, roasting process made the meat tender and juicy, and the herbs added a rich, earthy flavor. Fish, whether grilled or baked, was also popular. It was often served with a side of vegetables, such as roasted tomatoes, onions, or eggplants. Vegetable dishes were not just side dishes but an important part of the meal. Greek cuisine was known for its creative use of vegetables. For example, stuffed vegetables were a common dish. Bell peppers, tomatoes, or zucchinis were stuffed with a mixture of rice, herbs, and sometimes ground meat. These stuffed vegetables were then baked until tender, creating a delicious and nutritious dish. During the symposium, entertainment was also an important aspect. Musicians, often playing the lyre or the aulos, would provide a soft, melodious backdrop to the discussions. Dancers might also perform, their movements graceful and rhythmic. Poetry recitations were another form of entertainment. Poets would recite their works, which could be about love, war, nature, or any other topic that captured their imagination. The symposium was also a place for the exchange of ideas and knowledge. It was not uncommon for philosophers to attend these gatherings and share their thoughts. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, some of the most famous Greek philosophers, were known to participate in symposia. Their presence added a depth and intellectual rigor to the discussions. The symposium was a microcosm of Greek society, where the upper-class men could express their opinions, learn from others, and shape the intellectual and cultural landscape of their time. As the night wore on, the symposium would gradually come to an end. The guests would offer a final libation, a ritual pouring of wine as an offering to the gods. This was a way to give thanks for the food, drink, and the pleasant evening spent in the company of friends. The guests would then leave, carrying with them the memories of the delicious food, the stimulating conversations, and the cultural exchange that had taken place. In conclusion, the symposium was a unique and important institution in ancient Greek culture. It was a celebration of food, drink, and the human intellect. The combination of delicious cuisine, fine wine, intellectual discussions, and entertainment made the symposium a symbol of the sophistication and refinement of Greek society. It was a place where the boundaries between food, philosophy, and social life were blurred, creating an environment that was both convivial and intellectually stimulating.